Helena Edgeworth did not wish to attend the Ashworth ball. She had told her cousin Louisa precisely that twice, while sitting on the edge of the narrow bed in their aunt's hired townhouse. But Louisa had a talent for wearing down resistance with cheerful persistence, and so Helena found herself stepping out of a hackney carriage onto a rain-slicked pavement, the great house blazing with candlelight before her. She wore ivory silk, no lace, no embroidery, no pearls. The gown had been her mother's, altered to suit the current fashion but left deliberately spare. A thin velvet ribbon gathered her dark hair at the nape of her neck. She owned a single strand of garnets, but she had left them in the velvet box. She would not pretend to be something she was not. The receiving line was a gauntlet. Lady Ashworth, the Duke's mother, scanned Helena from head to toe with a flicker of dismissal that was far more efficient than any outright cut. Helena curtsied, murmured the proper words, and moved into the ballroom. The heat and noise struck her like a wave. Hundreds of candles blazed in crystal chandeliers, and the air throbbed with the strings of a country dance. Jewels glittered on every neck and wrist. Plumes bobbed above turbans. Helena walked to the edge of the floor and stood beside a potted fern, perfectly content to be invisible. But she was not invisible. A young man with sandy hair and a cheerful expression asked her to stand up for the next set. She accepted with a small smile. Then a baron, old enough to be her grandfather, requested the honor of a quadrille. She danced it with grace. By the time the third gentleman approached, a viscount with a stammer and kind eyes, a murmur had begun to ripple through the crowd. Who was the girl without jewels? The one in the plain ivory gown. She must be nobody, yet she danced as though she had been schooled by a dancing master. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice was low and measured. She did not simper. She did not flutter her lashes. Across the ballroom, Alexander Ashworth, 6th Duke of Ashworth, leaned one shoulder against a marble column and observed her with the detached curiosity of a man who had long ago exhausted the pleasures of the season. He was tall, dark-haired, and possessed of a face that portrait painters loved and debutantes feared. His expression rarely shifted from an aloof boredom that most of society interpreted as arrogance. They were not entirely wrong. "Who is she?" he asked his friend Lord Marcus Tilney. Marcus followed his gaze. "The ivory gown. I believe she is a Miss Edgeworth, here with the Pembertons. No fortune, I'm told. Father made some disastrous investments and fled to the continent years ago. The mother died when she was young." Edgeworth, the Duke tested the name. "She wears no jewels." "Perhaps she has none." "Precisely." The Duke's mouth curved, but it was not a smile. It was the expression of a man who had just found a clean page in a book of smudged print. He pushed away from the column and made his way across the floor, cutting through the dancers with the unconcerned ease of a man who owned half the county. Helena saw him coming. It was impossible not to. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. He stopped before her, and the viscount who had been about to claim her hand took one look at the Duke's face and retreated. "Miss Edgeworth," he inclined his head, "I am Ashworth, will you dance?" She studied him. She knew precisely who he was, what he was worth, and what the Ton said of him, that he was cold, proud, and hunted by every ambitious mamma in England. She also saw the flicker of something else behind his eyes, something weary and alert. "I will," she said, placing her hand in his. The waltz was just beginning. His hands settled at her waist and they began to move. He danced well, with a light, commanding lead. For a full turn they said nothing. "Then you are not like the others," he observed. "Is that meant as a compliment, Your Grace?" "An observation." "Then I shall observe that you are exactly as the others described." He nearly missed a step. "And how is that?" "You begin conversations with statements designed to unsettle," she said calmly. "It saves you the effort of genuine conversation, I imagine, a useful economy." A short silence. Then unexpectedly the Duke laughed, a low, genuine sound that drew glances from the neighboring couples. "You are direct, Miss Edgeworth." "I have little to lose by honesty. I am not here to catch a husband, your grace. I am here because my cousin wished for company. Tomorrow I shall return to my aunt's house, and by next season I will be forgotten. That knowledge allows a certain freedom." The music swirled around them. He did not look away from her face. "And if I were to call upon you tomorrow, then I would receive you, but I would not alter myself for the occasion." The waltz ended. He released her and she curtsied with perfect composure. As she turned to rejoin Louisa, she caught the hard, glittering stare of a woman standing near the refreshment table. Lady Portia St. Clair, the acknowledged diamond of the season. Her gown was a waterfall of sapphire silk, her throat heavy with matched stones. She smiled at Helena, and the smile was a blade. Helena did not flinch. She walked past the refreshment table and out onto the terrace, needing air. The night was cool, the garden below a labyrinth of shadows. She stood at the stone balustrade and let the quiet wash over her. She did not hear him follow, but a voice spoke from behind her. "Lady Portia is not accustomed to competition." Helena turned. The Duke stood in the doorway, the light from the ballroom haloing his shoulders. "Then she has nothing to fear from me. I am not competing." "That," he said, stepping forward, "is precisely why she should fear you." He came to stand beside her at the balustrade, and they looked out at the darkened garden together. Neither spoke. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who recognized something in each other and were not yet ready to name it. Inside, Lady Portia turned to her mother. "Who is that creature?" "A nobody," Lady St. Clair murmured. "Ignore her." But Portia did not intend to ignore her. She had waited 2 seasons for the Duke of Ashworth to notice her, and she would not be displaced by a dowd in an unadorned gown. The ball ended close to dawn. Helena rode home in the carriage with a sleeping Louisa, the first gray light seeping through the windows. She touched the ribbon in her hair and thought of the Duke's laugh, the way his eyes had softened for just a moment. She told herself it meant nothing. It could mean nothing. She was not foolish enough to dream. But as the carriage rattled through the waking streets of London, she knew that something had begun. Something she had not sought and did not want. Something that would not let her go. By noon the next day, the calling cards had begun to arrive. 3 baronets, a viscount, 2 army officers, and a rather confused elderly earl who had been convinced by his daughter that the Edgeworth girl was the new sensation. Louisa fluttered about the drawing-room in a state of near hysteria, arranging the cards on the mantelpiece as though they were holy relics. Helena sat by the window with a book, turning the pages steadily. "You must be pleased," her aunt, Mrs. Pemberton, said, not bothering to hide the calculation in her voice. "The Duke of Ashworth himself. Do you understand what that could mean for this family?" "I understand that a single dance does not a proposal make," Helena replied without looking up. "Then you must encourage him, smile more, flatter him. Men of his station expect admiration." Helena closed her book. "If his grace requires flattery, he will find no shortage of it elsewhere. I will not offer what I do not feel." Mrs. Pemberton's lips thinned. "Your father's reputation leaves you with limited options, niece. Pride is a luxury you cannot afford." The words hung in the air like smoke. Helena rose, her composure absolute. "Then I shall live without luxury. Excuse me, aunt, I wish to walk in the park." She took no maid, only a plain bonnet and a light pelisse. Hyde Park at the fashionable hour was a theater, and she had no desire to perform. She chose a path less traveled, where the trees grew thick and the serpentine glittered through the leaves. She had walked perhaps 10 minutes when a rider drew up beside her. A bay gelding, superbly muscled, and atop it the Duke. "Miss Edgeworth, you walk alone." "I prefer my own company to idle chatter, your grace." He dismounted, the reins looped casually in one gloved hand. "Then I shall endeavor not to chatter." They walked in silence for a time, the horse's hooves a soft percussion on the earth. The Duke seemed different in daylight, less guarded, though no less keen. His coat was dark blue superfine, his boots gleaming, but there was a tiredness around his eyes that she had not noticed the night before. "You do not like these affairs," she said. "The balls, the suppers." "I do not. Yet you attend them." "Duty, my mother insists. She wishes me to marry." "And you do not wish it." He did not answer immediately. They rounded a bend, and the path opened onto a view of the water, silver under the afternoon sun. "I wish to marry a woman who does not bore me senseless within a quarter hour. So far, the season has not been productive." She surprised herself by smiling. A high bar indeed. He glanced at her, and there was something warmer in his expression. "You mock me." "Gently, you invited it." They walked on. He asked her about her reading, and she told him of the history of the Italian city-states, which she was studying. He responded with a discussion of trade routes and the fall of Venetian naval power that proved he had more than dancing and hunting in his head. They argued lightly about the role of mercantile interests in the decline of aristocratic power. She won a point, and he conceded it with a grudging nod. Then from the main path a voice called out, "Ashworth, well met." Lord Ambrose, Marquis of Dunmore, rode toward them on a white horse that was altogether too handsome. He was a handsome man himself, fair-haired, blue-eyed, with a smile that seemed to promise perpetual good humor. He bowed to Helena from the saddle. "Miss Edgeworth, I believe. I saw you at the ball last night. You danced superbly." "Lord Dunmore is too kind." "Not at all. I had hoped to secure an introduction, but Ashworth here claimed you first. I shall know better next time." He turned to the Duke with an easy grin. "You won't monopolize the lady, I trust." The Duke's expression had gone carefully blank. "Miss Edgeworth's time is her own." "Excellent, then I shall call upon you, Miss Edgeworth, if I may. I have a small collection of Venetian maps that might interest you." Ashworth mentioned the city-states. He had overheard. Of course. He rode off with a wave, and the Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Helena observed this with interest but made no comment. Upon returning home, she found a letter waiting on the salver in the hall. The paper was expensive, the seal plain black wax with no crest. She opened it in the privacy of her bedchamber. "Miss Edgeworth, a well-wisher advises you to distance yourself from the Duke of Ashworth. His attention will bring you nothing but ruin. Your father's dishonor is known. Should it become common gossip, you will be destroyed. Spare yourself the humiliation. Step aside now." She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of her writing desk. Her hands did not shake. The fear that coiled in her stomach was cold, but it was not the cold of surrender. It was the cold of resolve. Someone wanted her gone. Someone who knew about her father and who considered her a threat. She thought of Lady Portia's blade-sharp smile. She thought of Lord Ambrose's too-easy charm. She sat down and began to write a letter of her own, not to the Duke, but to a solicitor her mother had once trusted. If the past was going to be used against her, she intended to understand every inch of it first. The pen scratched across the paper, steady and deliberate. Outside, the street sounds faded into dusk. Somewhere in Mayfair, in a grand house filled with sapphire silk and ambition, plans were being laid. Helena did not know them yet, but she knew one thing with certainty: she would not step aside. Not for threats, not for whispers, not for anyone. The invitation to Lord Westbrook's house party arrived in a thick cream envelope, addressed in a lady's elegant hand. Louisa was ecstatic. Mrs. Pemberton immediately began planning which of Helena's gowns could be altered to look less like mourning and more like hope. Helena herself felt a cold premonition settle in her chest. A week in the country with the cream of society, including, she had already learned, the Duke of Ashworth and Lady Portia St. Clair, was not a respite. It was an arena. Westbrook Hall was a sprawling Elizabethan manor of honey-colored stone, set amid formal gardens and a deer park. Helena's bedchamber overlooked a rose garden, the late blooms nodding in the September breeze. She unpacked her few belongings, including the book of Italian history and her mother's garnets, which she still did not wear but could not bear to leave behind. The first evening passed without incident. The second, however, brought the treasure hunt. Lady Westbrook, a cheerful woman with a love of theatricals, had devised a game in which clues were hidden throughout the house and grounds. The prize was a small, jeweled brooch, an antique piece of little real value but great sentimental significance to the family. The party was divided into pairs by drawing names from a silver bowl. Helena drew the Duke. Lady Portia, across the room, crumpled her slip of paper with a smile that did not waver. "It seems fortune favors us," the Duke murmured as they set out with their first clue. "Or mischief does," Helena replied. They worked well together. She was quick with riddles, and he knew the house's history, including the secret passages. They found 3 clues in swift succession, laughing under their breath like schoolchildren. For a brief, bright stretch of time, Helena forgot the letter in her drawer, the whispers, the warnings. She was simply a woman enjoying the company of a man who looked at her as though she were the most interesting puzzle he had ever encountered. Then the cry went up. The brooch was missing. The guests gathered in the great hall, exchanging bewildered glances. Lady Westbrook was pale. Lord Westbrook, a bluff country gentleman, demanded silence and ordered a search of the house. It was Lady Portia who suggested, with an air of pained reluctance, that perhaps someone had taken the brooch inadvertently. "A game can be so confusing," she said sweetly. "Someone might have picked it up without thinking." Heads nodded. The search began. Helena stood quietly near the fireplace, the Duke at her side. His expression was unreadable, but his hand rested near hers on the mantel, a silent gesture of solidarity. A footman appeared 20 minutes later, carrying a small velvet pouch. "It had been found," he said, "in Miss Edgeworth's reticule." The silence that followed was a living thing. Every eye turned to Helena. Portia's expression was one of sorrowful shock. "Oh, Miss Edgeworth, surely not." Helena's heart hammered, but her voice emerged clear and unwavering. "I did not take the brooch. I have not touched it nor seen it. My reticule has been in my chamber since before the game began." "But the door was unlocked," Portia said. "Anyone might have." "Anyone might have placed it there," the Duke interrupted. His voice was calm, but it cut through the room. "A search of all chambers is required, including yours, Lady Portia, including mine." Portia's color rose. "Your Grace, I hardly think." "I do. My valet will assist your housekeeper, Lord Westbrook. A thorough search. I will not see a guest condemned on such flimsy evidence." Lord Westbrook, recognizing the authority in the Duke's tone, agreed. The guests dispersed to their rooms under a cloud of tension. Helena returned to her chamber, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited. She did not weep. She refused to weep. An hour later, a knock came. The Duke entered without ceremony, his face grim. The brooch was traced to a maid. She confessed that Lady Portia paid her to hide it in your belongings. Helena let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "I see. I will ensure Lord Westbrook knows the truth. Portia will leave in the morning. Her family will be informed." "Why?" Helena asked. "Why did you believe me?" He crossed the room and stood before her, closer than was proper. "Because I have watched you. For weeks. You do not lie. You do not scheme. You carry yourself with a dignity that puts the rest of us to shame. I believed you because you are incapable of the smallness that drives people like Portia." She looked up at him, and in his eyes she saw something she had not allowed herself to expect. It was not tenderness exactly. It was recognition, respect, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but I did not require rescue. I only required the truth." He flinched almost imperceptibly. "I know. That is why I will not offer you empty gallantries. You deserve better." He left her then, and she sat for a long while in the darkness, the rose garden silver outside her window. The Duke of Ashworth was learning, but so was she, learning that her quiet strength had a cost, and that she was willing to pay it. The return to London felt like stepping back into a cage. The scandal at Westbrook Hall had been hushed, but gossip, like smoke, found every crack. Portia had departed under a cloud her family's fury barely concealed. Yet the ton did not rally to Helena. Instead, they whispered about her father. The unnamed source had done its work. Lady Portia's final strike came at the musicale of Mrs. Fortescue, a gathering of 200 of society's most influential. Helena attended with Louisa, her aunt having declared herself indisposed, a thin excuse to avoid association with a niece whose name was now murmured behind fans. The music was pleasant, the company brittle. Helena sat near the back, her ivory gown replaced by a sober dove-gray silk that she had trimmed herself. During the interval, Portia rose. She held a letter yellowed with age. She smiled, and her voice carried with theatrical clarity. "I have come across a curiosity," she announced. "A letter from a certain gentleman to a moneylender, begging for an extension of his debts. The gentleman, I believe, is the late father of a young lady present tonight. He speaks of his shame, his desperation. Shall I read it?" No one stopped her. Curiosity was a stronger force than decency. Portia read, her voice dripping with false pity. The letter detailed a man's ruin, his pleas, his promises of repayment that would never come. It ended with a line that struck Helena like a blow. "My daughter will be left with nothing but my disgrace." The room filled with a terrible, hushed delight. Heads turned. Helena felt the weight of 100 stares, but she did not drop her gaze. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm as carved marble. Then the Duke stood. He had been seated near the front, a guest of honor. His chair scraped back with a sound that silenced even the whispers. "Lady Portia," he said, and his voice was the cold of a winter sea. "You have read a private letter, obtained by means I shudder to imagine, for the sole purpose of humiliating a woman whose only crime is to possess more character than you will ever comprehend. This display shames not Miss Edgeworth, but yourself and anyone who indulges it." He walked to where Helena sat and extended his hand. "Miss Edgeworth, I believe the air in this room has become unbreathable. Will you allow me to escort you home?" She placed her hand in his. The room was silent as a tomb. They walked out together, past the frozen figures of the ton, past Portia's mask of fury, past Mrs. Fortescue's open mouth. The carriage was waiting. He helped her inside and gave the order to his driver. As the wheels began to turn, Helena's composure cracked. A single tear slid down her cheek. She did not sob. She did not speak. The Duke said nothing, but he reached across and took her hand again, holding it in the dimness with a steadiness that needed no words. "I will not be rescued," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have spent my life refusing rescue. I will not become a creature who needs a man to fight her battles." "I know," he said. "That is why I did not fight. I simply refused to watch you be mauled by cowards. There is a difference." She looked at him, and in the flickering light of the carriage lamps, his face was stripped of arrogance. There was only a man, weary and determined, holding her hand as though it were the most precious thing he had ever touched. "Lord Ambrose has proposed," she said. "He called this morning." His grip tightened fractionally. "And your answer?" "I asked for time. He seems kind. He seems—" she trailed off. She could not say safe because Lord Ambrose did not feel safe. He felt like a man wearing a mask of pleasantness. "He is not what he seems," the Duke said carefully. "I have no proof, only instinct, but I am rarely wrong about people." "You were wrong about me," she said, "at first." "No, I was right about you from the first moment. I was only wrong about myself and what I was capable of feeling." The carriage stopped outside her aunt's house. He helped her down and released her hand. "I will not press you, Helena, but I will not disappear. Whatever comes, you will not face it alone." She mounted the steps without looking back, but she knew he watched until the door closed behind her. That night, she did not sleep. She sat at her desk and looked at the drawer where the anonymous letter lay. She thought of Portia's venom and Lord Ambrose's smooth proposal and the Duke's unwavering presence. The pieces were beginning to fit together in her mind, and the picture they formed was darker than she had imagined. Lord Ambrose proposed with all the proper forms. He came to the Pemberton house in a coat of pale blue superfine, his cravat tied in an impeccable mathematical. He spoke of his admiration, his estate in Derbyshire, his wish to make Helena comfortable and respected. He did not speak of love, which she found oddly honest. She asked for a week to consider. He granted it with an elegant bow and a kiss to her gloved hand that lingered a moment too long. The Duke called the following morning, but not to court her. He came with a leather folio under his arm and a gravity that silenced even Mrs. Pemberton's effusions. Helena received him in the small morning room, and he laid the folio on the table between them. "I employed an investigator," he said without preamble. "After Westbrook, I wanted to know who was behind Portia's schemes. She is vicious, but she is not subtle. Someone more clever was guiding her." Helena opened the folio. Inside were copies of letters, statements from servants, a signed confession from a Bow Street runner who had been paid to follow her. All of it traced back to one man, Lord Ambrose. "He knew about your mother's trust," the Duke said, his voice carefully controlled. "A legacy from her family in Scotland. It becomes yours upon your marriage, a sum not widely known but substantial enough to restore a failing estate. His estate is failing. He needed an heiress without a protector, someone society would not defend. He hired Portia to ruin you so that when he offered marriage you would be grateful and isolated. Then he would control the funds." Helena read every page. Her hands remained steady, but her heart was a slow, heavy drum. She thought of the letter on her desk. She thought of Lord Ambrose's easy smile, his Venetian maps, his offers of protection. "I suspected something," she said quietly. "He was too perfect. He never disagreed. He never challenged me. That is not the behavior of a man who sees a woman as his equal. That is the behavior of a man who sees a woman as a tool." The Duke looked at her with something like wonder. Most would be shattered by such a revelation. "I have been shattered before," Helena said. "By my father's leaving, by my mother's death, by the cruelty of people who should have been kind. I am not shattered now. I am angry, but anger is useful if one knows how to wield it." "What will you do?" She closed the folio. "I will refuse him, publicly if necessary, but I will not ruin him. Ruin breeds only more ruin. I will let him live with the knowledge of what he is. That is punishment enough for a man of his pride." The Duke nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands, then back at her face. "Helena, I have lived my life behind a wall of my own making. I thought myself above the games of the ton, but I was only above them because I was too afraid to play and lose. You have shown me a different way, to stand in the open and refuse to be diminished. I love you. I do not say that to sway your decision. I say it because it is the truth, and you deserve truth." The words hung between them, simple and enormous. She did not answer at once. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the gray London street. "I need time," she said. "Not to decide if I love you, I know that I do, but I need time to know if I can trust that love. Trust is not built in a moment nor in a crisis. It is built in quiet days and small choices. I will go to Hertfordshire to my mother's cottage. I will think, and I will write to you." He rose. He did not try to touch her. "I will wait, however long you need." She left London the next morning. The cottage in Hertfordshire was small and whitewashed, with a garden that had run wild during the years of neglect. Helena arrived with one trunk and a heart full of turmoil. The first day, she scrubbed floors. The second, she began to tame the roses. By the end of the week, she had regained a measure of peace, and with it clarity. She loved the Duke. That was not in question, but love alone could not bridge the chasm between her world and his. She would not enter a marriage that was a favor, a protection, a nobleman's act of charity. She would enter only a union of equals. She wrote the letter at the cottage's small desk, the afternoon light slanting through the ivy-framed window. To His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth. I have searched my heart and I find you there. But I will not marry a title, I will not marry a protector. I will marry a man who sees me as his partner in all things, who will argue with me, challenge me, and never ask me to become less than I am for the sake of his pride or his position. If you are that man, come to me, not as a duke but as yourself. We will speak as two people without rank between us. If after that we both wish to proceed, I will accept your courtship on equal terms. If not, I will release you with gratitude and respect. Yours in hope, Helena Edgeworth. She sent it by post and tried not to count the hours. 2 days later, a horse appeared on the lane. A single rider, no grooms, no carriage. He wore a plain brown coat and riding boots dusty from the road. He dismounted at the gate and walked up the path to where she stood among the roses, secateurs in hand. "Miss Edgeworth," he said, "I received your letter, I am here." He did not look like a duke. He looked like a man who had ridden hard and slept little, his jaw shadowed, his eyes anxious. She had never seen him more handsome. They walked in the garden. They talked. He told her of his childhood, his father's coldness, his mother's impossible expectations. He confessed that he had built his wall of arrogance not because he thought himself better than others, but because he was terrified of being seen as inadequate. He admitted that he had nearly let Portia's poison work, not out of malice, but out of cowardice, because standing up for Helena meant standing against his own world. She listened. Then she spoke of her father's disgrace, of the years of scraping by, of the suitors who had fled the moment they learned she had no dowry. She spoke of her mother's quiet strength, and how she had promised herself she would never diminish herself for any man. "I do not want you to diminish," he said. "I want you to grow, and I want to grow beside you." She looked at him for a long moment. The sun was setting, turning the cottage garden to amber and rose. She reached out and took his hand, not as a duke, not as a suitor, but as a man she had come to trust. "Then we shall grow together," she said. He did not kneel. He did not produce a ring. He simply lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers with a reverence that was not worship but recognition. She was not an ideal to him. She was real, and he was learning to be real as well. They returned to London a week later, not engaged but openly courting. The ton buzzed with confusion. A duke courting a woman without fortune, without jewels, without apology. It was unprecedented, but they did not use that word, for this story avoids it. It was simply unheard of, and society did not know whether to be scandalized or envious. Helena did not care. She walked into Almack on the duke's arm, wearing her mother's garnets at last, small, simple, and perfectly sufficient. The final ball of the season was given by the Duchess of Devonshire, and all of London society fought to attend. The great house blazed with candlelight, the ballroom a swirl of silk and diamonds. Lady Portia, her schemes long exposed, had been sent to rusticate with relatives in Yorkshire. Lord Ambrose, his debts and deceptions laid bare by quiet whispers the Duke had allowed to circulate, had departed for the continent, his credit in ruins. The ton, ever fickle, had moved on to new scandals. Helena Edgeworth entered the ballroom on the arm of Alexander Ashworth, Duke of Ashworth, and the crowd parted as it had once parted for him alone. But now the stares were not curious or dismissive. They were assessing, calculating, and in many cases envious. She wore a gown of pale silk the color of moonlight, unadorned by lace or beadwork. Her dark hair was dressed simply, a few curls escaping at her temples. Around her throat lay a single strand of garnets. At her breast, a small brooch, the rose-gold band the Duke had given her that afternoon, an heirloom of his grandmother's, delicate and warm. They danced a waltz. His hand at her waist was steady, his eyes on her face. "You are the most beautiful woman in this room," he said. "There are duchesses present dripping in sapphires," she replied. "I did not say the most decorated. I said the most beautiful." She smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You are becoming quite adept at compliments. I have had an excellent teacher." After the waltz, they slipped out onto the terrace. The garden below was dark and sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. He led her down the steps to a bench hidden by a trellis of climbing roses. "I have a question," he said, and his voice was serious now. "Ask it." "Will you marry me, Helena? Not as a duke asks a debutante, not as a protector asks a ward, but as a man asks his equal. Will you walk with me through whatever comes and argue with me when I am insufferable and read Italian history with me by the fire and never, ever wear more jewels than you wish?" She was quiet for a moment, letting the words settle into her heart. Then she reached up and unpinned the garnet strand from her throat. She held it out to him. "This belonged to my mother. It is the only thing of value she left me aside from my name. I give it to you now as a pledge. I will marry you. I will be your duchess. But I will also be Helena Edgeworth, who entered a ball unadorned and found a man who saw her clearly. That woman will never disappear." He took the garnets and closed his fingers around them. "She never could. It is that woman I love." The kiss they shared then was not their first, but it was the one that sealed their future. It held no desperation, no conquest. It was the meeting of two people who had chosen each other with open eyes and steady hearts. They married in the village church near her mother's cottage, not in St. George, with 1,000 guests. Only Louisa, Mrs. Pemberton, weeping happily, the Duke's mother who had, after long reflection, decided that a woman who could survive Lady Portia was made of material suitable for a duchess, and a few close friends attended. Helena wore ivory silk, the same gown, carefully preserved. She wore no veil, and the only jewel was the rose gold ring on her finger. The ton grumbled at being excluded, but the Duke and his new duchess did not care. They spent a month in Hertfordshire in the cottage before taking up residence at Ashworth Hall. There, Helena walked the long galleries, the portraits of centuries of Ashworths frowning down at her. She did not feel small. She felt like the beginning of a new chapter. One evening, months later, the Duke found her in the library, a book open in her lap, firelight playing over her features. She looked up as he entered, and the smile she gave him was the same quiet, unadorned smile she had offered across a ballroom a lifetime ago. "What are you thinking?" he asked, settling into the chair opposite. "That I am glad I wore no jewels that night," she said. "If I had, you might have looked at me and seen only another glittering thing. Instead, you saw me." He leaned forward and took her hand. "I see you still, and I will every day for the rest of my life." Outside the window, the grounds of Ashworth Hall lay peaceful under a rising moon. Inside, the Duchess of Ashworth turned a page, and the Duke watched her with the quiet, abiding love of a man who had learned that the truest treasure is never the one that sparkles.